Good morning. Good morning. Dear friends, colleagues, дорогие друзья. Приветствует российское посольство вас накануне Дня России, нашего основного государственного праздника. Today we will devote our press conference to vital topic of summing up of certain diplomatic, economic and political results of the previous year, as it has become a tradition in our relations. Let us start from the major results and achievements of this year in the terms of growth of economy and some related subjects like inflation, exchange rates, and so on and so forth. We can state with certain satisfaction that in spite of the very tense and turbulent international situation, which caused many world economies to suffer, overall results of Russian economy in the previous year, in particular in 2021, was majorly positive. GDP volume and current prices by the end of 2021 reached a level of 101.9%. That means showed a growth of 1.9% compared to the level not of pandemic 2020, but to the level of 2019 pre-pandemic year. Consumer demand had grown by 9.6%, and accumulation of basic capital, investment capital, showed an increase of 7%. By the end of the first quarter of this current year, 2022, Russian GDP had increased by 3.7% year to year to the similar interval in the previous 2021. What was really interesting that in March of this year, industrial growth in comparison with the previous February showed the growth of 9.9%. The unemployment in Russia stays for the moment at historically low level, about 4%. The most amazing detail for me, which I learned from the current economic reports, is that the price of super gasoline, that means automobile fuel, from the beginning of March to the end of May, through about 2.5 months, dropped in Russia on average from 52.3 rubles per liter. All the prices are quoted in our country by liters, to the level of 51.1 ruble per liter. That means about 85 euro cents. Frankly, me, who got my first driving license in 1974, I can't recollect such an amazing result on this fuel market. During the recent 3 months, our central bank had managed to stabilize the exchange rate of ruble, and on the top spike level, it was about 120 rubles for $1. By now, it is about 61 ruble for $1, which is a record low for about 3 or 4 years. I can remember only pre-pandemic times then such exchange rate was existent. The basic banking rate of central bank as well spiked at a certain moment to 20%. Recently, it was in 2 steps. It was decreased to 11%, and After tomorrow, on Friday, they expect that central bank at another meeting will take a new decision to make it lower. Most curious and maybe most interesting for Romanian public and business is to mention that Russia registers now substantial increase of profits from foreign trade. According to a British magazine, The Spectator, the profit, the positive saldo of the current financial operations, to explain it simply, export earnings minus import revenues, it's a joke, of course, spiked to the record level through the first trimester of this year, to the level of $106 billion. Roughly, it is 3 times more than in 2021, and expected by the Business Insider information. Expected total annual positive balance will be in the roundabout of 285 and maybe even more $billion. It would amount approximately to the sum of illegally frozen by the collective West part of Russian central bank assets in hard currency, which are evaluated at the level of $300 billion. These two indicators give us the answer, and I believe enough comprehensive, enough convincing answer to many questions about the effects and efficiency of all those 6 packages of EU illegal anti-Russian economic sanctions and the rest of the sanctions announced by the United States and other members of G7, for example. If we summarize it in simple arithmetics, as well, information available in the Western mass media, out of 195 member states of the United Nations, only 65 supported those sanctions, being illegal from the standpoint of international law, as far as they have nothing to do with any decisions of the instances, international instances like Security Council of the United Nations. And the rest, 130 countries, among which we see People's China, India, and many other big countries like Indonesia and so on and so forth, they have abstained from joining this obsession with accusations and ungrounded anti-Russian claims. And this is the geopolitical, if you like, reality that we face nowadays in this regard. Very briefly, I don't believe that it will be very interesting for you in detail, but very briefly, I can tell you that in spite of all those difficulties and complications in international economic relations caused by those sanctions, damaging, as they say in many pragmatically thinking Western mass media outlets, more damaging to the West itself. Nevertheless, Russian economy showed good degree of resilience. Just yesterday, President Putin made a brief review of it. He noted, told the public that certain sectors of industry, for example, car making industry, is now facing certain difficulties. We'll come back to this issue in the optics or through the optics of bilateral relations, or production of metals, metallurgical industry as well faces certain difficulties. But overall, most sectors, the majority of the sectors of our economy, including construction, including agriculture. They feel themselves quite well. And it is enough to mention a couple of, so to say, most rememberable achievements through the recent year, like, for example, starting of exploitation, regular exploitation of big space launching sites in the Far East, which is called Vostochny, Eastern, translated from Russian into English. The intensive work goes for renovation and enlargement of basic infrastructure, including highways, railroads. For example, the works are going on improvement and perfection of so-called BAM railroad. It is Baikal-Amur major railroad, which goes to the north from the famous Trans-Siberian Railroad, and plays very important role, in particular, in connecting major industrial and raw materials producing regions with the Far East and its ports, and as a result, improving infrastructure of trade with the Far East, Southeast Asia, and even Indian Ocean partners, our economic partners. What I believe is worth mentioning as the last but never least, that Moscow, the capital city, ranked third best mega city in the world according to UN Habitat City Prosperity Index. You know, UN Habitat is a UN agency specialized in the development of human living environment, in particular urban development and so on and so forth. Moscow qualified third after Singapore and Canadian Toronto. But nevertheless, Moscow topped the infrastructure development rating, overtaking Hong Kong, and quality life dimension ranking ahead of Singapore. That means that capital city of Russia shows quite good competitiveness on the world market of mega cities. Among the other achievements, of course, we should mention such interesting development as completion of the construction of the Center for Construction of Large Offshore Facilities in Belokamenka, Murmansk region. It is in the north of European part of the Russian Federation. It was launched for regular operation, and it is the world's first plant for serial production of equipment for liquefaction of natural gas mounted on gravity-based structure platforms. That means that pipeline oil and gas very soon will diminish in the balance of Russian foreign trade, and opportunities for marketing our hydrocarbons would increase. There is evident and certain progress in production or resumption of the production of aircraft, big passenger aircraft engines, which had been stopped, unfortunately, some years before. At the same time, the news tells us that United Engine Construction Corporation has started serial production of, I can't frankly properly translate it into English. It is based on the diesel gas turbine engines for frigates of the Russian Navy, which is as well a big step ahead in technological progress of our country. Such news from scientific, science research, economic field, they are numerous, but I believe that if you are interested to learn more about it, you can visit more often the site of our embassy. Much of this information is available there. But of course, I can't avoid such a topic as review of basic measures of the government of Russian Federation to support economy and the citizens of our country. It is really a long list, believe me, about 4 pages, just of the points, 1-3 lines brief, or 1-3 lines long, not more. Like, for example, 4th stage of capital amnesty, allowing physical personalities to declare and to transfer into Russian jurisdiction all the capital, assets, and other securities being liberated from any tax, criminal, or administrative responsibility for previous period of time. For example, hospitality business got 0 value added tax for next 5 years. Young entrepreneurs, young businessmen from 14 to 25 years are getting governmental grants up to 1 million rubles for their own startups. And of course, a number of measures to support families, in particular families with the big number of children. Of course, minimal wage was increased quite recently. And even in the situation when at certain period of time in the beginning of this year, the rate of inflation was a little bit alarming. In the second part of May, and President Putin mentioned this fact, it had been registered a full stop. Maybe it is not a final full stop, but a full stop, or at least a pause in the growth of inflation in our country. Although in the first 4 months, the rate was rather high, and still the final score, so to say, will be seen by the end of the year. From this item, I would like to move to a review of our bilateral relations with Romania. I should say that development of our bilateral relations in the outcoming year could be characterized as a controversial one. On the one hand, economic and trade results of the year look very optimistic. The trade turnover had completely recovered after pandemic and even superseded the record high level of an annual turnover registered after well-known Ukrainian crisis starting year 2014. It reached literally $4.93 billion level. The structure, the balance of the mutual trade remained more or less traditional. Russian export to Romania was evaluated for $3.34 billion, while Romanian export to Russia was equal to $1.59 billion. The bulk of Russian produce delivered to Romanian market consisted of hydrocarbons, other raw materials, And the Romanian export basically composed of car spare parts, some chemicals, and light, or if you like, consumer goods industry production, like furniture and some others. Recently, there was certain growth of activity in the trade exchange of, for example, trade in agricultural fertilizers, construction materials, and so on and so forth. But very, very recently, a number of such deals had been at least stalled, maybe frozen, because of those economic sanctions I have mentioned at the beginning. Because one of those sanctions, for example, bans any currency transactions between European Union, that means Romania in particular, and Russian Federation. As a result, no trade deal could be paid for, no good, no merchandise could be paid properly and in due time. How to remove this obstacle? It is a big question, and what I can say for the moment, I have no answer to this question. In the first trimester of 2024, information on our mutual trade is more scarce because of those political and geopolitical complications. And but one of the indicators is available, which I borrowed from the local representation of Russian business. Natural gas import from Russia during the first 4 months of this year reached almost 1 billion cubic meters, 953 million cubic meters, which is it could be easily compared with the annual level of pre-pandemic 2019. At that time, it was 994. And in pandemic year, it was 1 billion cubic meters of natural gas imported by Romanian business actors. One important aspect shouldn't be forgotten in this regard. I have mentioned that one of the substantial articles, one of substantial segment of our mutual trade was cooperation in production of passenger cars. But as far as Renault Automobile Corporation made a decision to withdraw from Russia, major Renault assembly enterprises in Russia will continue production under different administration. One of the effects of that decision, of that change, would be that in Moscow, it will be revived the famous in the second half of the 20th century automobile trademark, Moskvich, Moscovite, because the assembly enterprise of Renault had been taken under the aegis of the Moscow city administration, city government. And they plan with eventual participation of the Chinese car makers to launch production very soon in view of starting production of electric cars on the horizon of 3-4 years. In political and diplomatic sphere, unfortunately, I can't tell you that there are good results, and to my mind, those relations hardly could be qualified as at least satisfactory. The only exception was pragmatic cooperation within the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, and in particular, while elections of new Secretary General were held last year, and you know that a prominent Romanian diplomat, Lazar Comanescu, was elected, and Russia supported this candidature and hope that will continue pragmatic, mutually beneficial cooperation within this structure, though it is now under very strong, I would say, destructive pressure of Kiev, which doesn't see around it anything but Russian threat, or I don't know, other nightmares. This is a fact. After the beginning of special military operation of Russian Federation in Ukraine, Romania joined the common position of the European Union, and in particular was among the countries who vigorously supported those illegal, from the international law standpoint, economic sanctions. The consequences are very visible around us, but the atmosphere of interstate bilateral relations, of course, was perplexed very much by recent expulsion of 10 diplomatic staff members of our embassy by the Romanian authorities. They were declared persona non grata without providing any evidence. I am not speaking about details, but believe me that no evidence was provided confidentially, which would support the claim of our Romanian colleagues that their activities in Romania were not corresponding with their diplomatic status provided in the Vienna Convention of 1961. There is one specific question already received on this very subject. I would like to mention it. One of you asks why Russian reaction to this expulsion was not just a mirror reflection one. I can't completely agree with this assumption, because Russian decision was proportionate response. That means 10 members of the staff of Romanian diplomatic and consular missions were expelled. Not all of them were diplomats, but it just reflects the difference in the structure of our representation and the Romanian representation. On the other hand, it reflects our understanding, hopefully it is mutual understanding with the Romanian side, that there still exists the added value of keeping diplomatic channels of communication open between our two countries. This is the answer. Among other landmarks, there is a good list of very, very negative, to my mind, developments, but I will, just to economize a little bit our time, I will stop over only one of them that deals with the evident practice of discrimination, deprivation of legitimate rights, and hampering any legal activities of Russian businesses and Russian citizens in Romania. We know that, for example, the branches of tube and metallurgical company here in Romania, in spite of the fact that there were more than 2,500 employees in those facilities, they had to stop their activities, their operation, because of those measures to freeze banking accounts and to hamper any regular business of this company. Many problems of the same kind are faced, if you like, by our regular citizens. Thanks God, I haven't heard, for example, about expulsion of Russian students, but many Russian citizens living legally in Romania, they found their banking accounts blocked. They were refused, denied to get new banking cards and proper banking services on one very ground that they are Russians. No other explanation, unfortunately, is available. Not to speak about ban on Russian TV channels and all kind of practices like physical threats, like trying to break through main gate of our embassy without going into too many details, and so on and so forth. This episode, I believe, it is still very vivid on our memories. Even such a, I would say, pitiful event took place when a group of parliamentarians visited our embassy to present their position of good intent and their wish to facilitate this way or another way return to the peaceful life, return of peace to the Ukrainian soil. And all of them, they were not simply reprimanded, but they were in fact sanctioned by the leadership of the parliamentary parties. What does it mean? Does it mean that major parliamentary parties in Romania are against peace in Ukraine? I can't understand this logic. Nevertheless, it is a fact. And unfortunately, a number of similar, very negative developments have taken place in our bilateral relations. We are going to monitor this situation. We are sending our notes, relevant notes, to the foreign ministry. Unfortunately, the feedback is very weak. If not to say that this feedback is formal and could be summarized as total lack of desire to change something to the better, to put it mildly. Nevertheless, there was a couple of developments of positive vector during the recent year. Last year, we managed, well before this, all those complications, to convene a scientific practical conference under the title 22nd of June 1941 in history of the Second World War, and 23rd of August of 1944 in history of Russian-Romanian relations in the mirror of modernity. It took place almost exactly a year before, but within the period I'm reporting to you about the results of it now. It was on the day of mourning and scorn in Russia, 22nd of June. Another development which is worth mentioning was completion by the Russian scientist Tatiana Pokivailova, a member of our Joint Commission of Historians on so-called difficult questions of our common history, including so-called question of so-called Romanian gold. She published the book, The Fate of Romanian Gold in Russia, 1916-2020, which with the help of our embassy has been recently translated into Romanian by a qualified translator, Romanian speaker. And I hope that by autumn, we'll be able to present this really interesting publication to the academic and public circles in Bucharest. About sanctions, I believe, or generic effect of sanctions, I believe if you have any specific questions, we'll come back to this topic, but I believe it is enough that I have said about it, and we can move to another evidently vital issue, which is reflected in a number of questions and evidently is of interest for the wider public of Romania. It is about Russian special operation in Ukraine. Romanian mass media widely circulate official position of Bucharest, blaming Russia for unprovoked, illegal, rude, and so on invasion, intrusion, aggression in Ukraine on February 24th. We have an adequate answer to those accusations, and we should frankly brush away outright most of them. And I believe that no one of those accusations could be agreed with, starting from unprovoked. The war against dissident population of Donbass was launched by the Kiev regime in April 2014. In that period, self-proclaimed, because there was no such provision in constitution, self-proclaimed acting president of Ukraine, Turchinov, ordered the armed forces, which is strictly forbidden, outright forbidden in the constitution of this country, ordered the armed forces to launch an all-out military campaign in Donbass, which very soon carried a referendum, but it is another topic. I'm not going to elaborate in this direction. The most memorable episodes of that starting phase of the conflict were aircraft missile attack on the city hall in Lugansk, which was presented as an explosion of air conditioner. Such ridiculous explanations were industrially multiplied by Kiev propaganda, but the eyewitnesses, the residents of Lugansk, they know very well, and they reported the true picture of that episode. Another was missile attack on the beach. In fact, on a number of such sites, on the beaches, on Azov Sea, and in Zugres township, when just peaceful families with children taking their sun baths on the beach of the sea were attacked with missiles, and dozens of people were killed, including teenagers, including small children. All those episodes, they provoked, in fact, very legitimate anger of the Donbass population. People in Donbass started meeting those army units of Kiev regime entering this region with the human chains. They were armless. They had no weapons at that time. But facing this brutal, rude, barbaric, undemocratic, now they are speaking about whether Ukraine is qualifying to the standards of democracy and so on and so forth, rule of law in the European Union. They started like that, and now they have even they degraded, in fact, in this respect. So nobody in the West is ready to remember those crimes committed by the extreme nationalists. And by now it is quite evident that they are followers of Bandera, a well-known, condemned collaborationist, accomplice of the Hitler regime in Nazi Germany. They carry on their bodies numerous tattoos of Nazi symbolic, which was widely shown after the capitulation of the nationalist regiment, they call themselves by the end of the day, in Mariupol recently in the mid-May, and by many, many other factors, because it is not tattoos that really are important. It is the pattern of their behavior. Neo-Nazism and Nazism, it is not anti-Semitism. It is a pattern of mentality, brutal, inhumane, and Ukrainian nationalists, they prove that they follow that pattern in full and try to go to even further extremities. Now we are facing numerous numerous products of fake industry of the empire of lie, like Mr. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, qualified the collective West, speaking about atrocities of the Russian troops. In fact, we have hard evidence that it were in the first place the neo-Nazi units and the regular military units of Ukrainian army, because they have introduced their commissars, I mean the neo-Nazis, their commissars, so to say, into every military unit of Ukrainian army. And prisoners of war report a number of episodes when some Ukrainian military were not ready to fight, first of all, against the citizens of their own country, because the residents of Donbas region, they are Ukrainian citizens. And they were ready to lay down their arms. And another officers of those neo-Nazi, so to say, formation, they just shot them on the spot. And the rest of the military, rank and file military, of course, they were terrorized. They had to continue. And in fact, it resembles very well the practices of the Second World War on the side of the Nazi Germany, for example. So the war started at least 8 years ago. And very recently, before February 24, Russian side got reliable information, which now is confirmed from different sources, in particular among the extreme nationalist circles of Ukraine, that they were planning a kind of political cleansing of Donbass, not later than the 8th of March, International Women's Day. I don't know why they did choose that date. It is up to them. And as a result, the launch on the eve of the special military operation launch, Russian side, through different official channels, proposed to Kyiv to withdraw its troops from around Donbass and to stop those preparations, which were at the final phase. The answer was negative, or on some channels there was no answer. As a result, it was not unprovoked. It was a preemptive, retaliatory strike, which allowed us to avoid the situation of 22nd of June 1941, when Soviet Union, Soviet leadership was aware about the immediate threat of German invasion, but to the last moment believed that that invasion could be delayed because the country was not very much ready to resist. What were the consequences of these tactics? You know very well, I hope. By now, I can tell you that, in fact, this genocidal war against Russian-speaking population of Donbass was going on through all previous 8 years, in spite of all negotiations, Minsk I, Minsk II, ceasefires, eternal ceasefires, complete ceasefires, comprehensive ceasefires, which were almost immediately breached by the Ukrainian side. And when people's militias had to retaliate, to give response to this damaging, barbaric fire on civilian quarters, on peaceful infrastructure like water supply, electricity power stations, and so on and so forth, then immediately, with the help, moral help of OSCE, Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, they started to disseminate claims that they were the armed forces of Donbass, which were shelling their own cities and townships and villages just to terrorize people, just to provoke such ridiculous and in fact humiliating to a reasonable people's thinking, to a human mentality claims, unfortunately, were well received in the West. By now, in this regard, the first main goal of the military operation of Russia was proclaimed providing security for the population of Donbass. I can tell you that substantial results have been achieved, though till now, and the recent days showed it, that in the agony of outrage, Ukrainian armed forces continue to and intensify shelling and bombing of the residential areas of Donetsk city and other towns and villages of this region, because one of the fortified military regions of them are not still destroyed or dismantled, as they say now in the frontline slang. And the shooting range allows them to hit living quarters. You can see those awful, really thrilling videos where women, children, elderly are lying already dead or crying over their relatives having been killed almost on their rise, as they say, and so on and so on. This is not interesting for the West. They are speaking about unprovoked Russian invasion. To make it brief, then, is written in my paper, which was prepared for this occasion, and which says how many aircraft, combat aircraft, helicopters, unmanned aerial vehicles, anti-aircraft missile systems, tanks, and other armored combat vehicles, and so on and so forth, had been destroyed by Russian and Donbass militias forces. I would mention for the moment a couple of facts. First of all, that just yesterday it was announced by our Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu that 97% of Lugansk People's Republic have been liberated. And to remove any doubt about it, full territory of Severodonetsk, which played the role of regional capital under Ukrainian occupation for recent years, 97% of Severodonetsk are liberated. The only relatively small zone of, if I'm not mistaken, it is called Azot enterprise, chemical industry enterprise. There is still remaining fighters, I would say plainly terrorists, belonging to Ukrainian army and Ukrainian nationalist units, trying to provoke situation. They have already blown up. They are mining everything. They are following the same scorched land strategy that was followed by Nazi retreating army when it was pushed out of the territory of the Soviet Union. They mine everything. including sea coast, to prevent export of grain, and so on and so forth. And in that Severodonetsk as well, they mined a number of chemical facilities. Already there was a couple of episodes there and in the roundabouts when in the chemical industry plants, they were exploded big cisterns with chlorium, for example, chlorus, and some other substances, acids, nitrogenic acid, for example, which those explosions, they produced minor environmental catastrophes. But this is unfortunately regular practice of retreating Ukrainian army units. Recently, there was a big discussion in the mass media about plans of providing Kiev criminal regime with long-range multiple rocket launching system, in particular one which bears the name HIMARS, produced in the United States. So many going forth and back maneuvers around it. I would say that it is very relevant to quote Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in this context. He said that the longer the range of armaments that you will supply, the further away we will move from our territory, the line beyond which neo-Nazi can threaten the Russian Federation. This is the logic of the moving towards achieving the first main goal of military operation, special military operation, providing physical security to the population of Donbass. During the special military operation, a number of very serious, not to say dangerous by their contents, documents were captured by the Russian military. They eloquently show that American Pentagon and German relevant agencies launched at least a decade before a big, wide research program of biological weapons in Ukraine, relying upon a wide network of biolaboratories. Major ones were about 14, but the network included up to 30 laboratories of this kind. I don't believe that I should bring all the details to you in this regard, but nevertheless, a couple of touches should be added to this really beautiful picture of breaching the Convention on Prohibition of Biological and Toxin Weapons. In fact, they are telling us that the employees working with dangerous pathogens in Ukraine were US citizens who had diplomatic immunity. The diseases that were studied, or better to say, the agents of those diseases, for example, in project UP8, it was, for example, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever and hantavirus, which have very dangerous, high hazard effect on the human health. And on February 24, 2022, Ukrainian Health Ministry publicly issued urgent instruction to dispose the reserves of dangerous and especially dangerous pathogens stored at those biological facilities. In particular, they were studying the means of transfer, so to say, of all those diseases through birds and other carriers of pathogens. In particular, armed forces of Russian Federation discovered drones equipped with 30 liters containers and sprays that were supposed to carry those poisonous, those infectious materials to the wider possible areas around. It is an established fact that potentially dangerous biological agents were tested on the most vulnerable social group. For example, patients of Kharkov Regional Psychiatric Hospital number 3. And such facts, believe me, they are numerous. They can't be denied. They are supported by hard evidence, by evidence of the participants of medical staff from Ukraine, and by documents carrying signatures and seals of American and German participants in those research works. If you don't mind, we'll move to another issue, which I formulated as perspectives of peace restoration of peace in Ukraine. A number of questions are addressing this subject. As far as I can tell you that this subject is as well one of the substantial for us. If we dealt with the issue of providing security to the residents of Donbass and demilitarization of Ukraine, which poses an immediate threat not to the population of Donbass only, but to neighboring countries. You know that Army has already launched a number of attacks, relatively minor one till now, but a number of attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation proper. This process is going on, but nevertheless, chances to reestablish peace in Ukraine now or in the nearest future evidently depend on a number of factors. First of all is security of Donbass population to take cover. Second point, evidently important in this context, is the fact that the United States, Canada, European Union members, and NATO members from Europe generally are pumping more and more sophisticated lethal weapons to Ukraine. Recently, Norwegian, German, American made long-range artillery have been noticed in the front line and destroyed by the forces of Russian Federation and Donbass republics. Briefly and eloquently, the position of Russian Federation in this regard was formulated by a foreign minister who said that with more and more weapons sent, delivered to Kiev, the West is aiming to drag out conflict in Ukraine. This is the only reasonable explanation. You can't extinguish fire with pouring gasoline or oil into it. Sending arms to Ukraine means that those extreme nationalists, neo-Nazis, I have spoken about, they will use it against population, not only of Donetsk. Now, they say that level of public attention to Ukraine in the United States has decreased four times compared to the early March. But nevertheless, we remember how much noise was produced around, for example, a missile striking a railway station square in the face of the railway station in Kramatorsk some weeks ago. Russian side was immediately blamed for that awful, terrible crime. But very soon it became clear that the missile that was fired on that crowd, by the way, crowd that collected, responding to the appeals in the social media networks, that evacuation to the Kiev-controlled areas would be organized through the railway. And it was established by the serial number of that missile of .U model, which had been removed from regular service in the Russian army about two decades ago, over a decade ago for sure. That it was from the region of Ukrainian forces control that missile came to that railway station in the Vauxhall Square. What does it mean? That all the weapons available to Kiev regime, they are used not according to the laws of war fixed in the international conventions, not according to logic, human logic, but exclusively without almost any exception to terrorize peaceful population, to destroy, demoralize people generally, and to devastate the whole country to the most possible extent, so that inevitable retreat and defeat will leave Ukraine in ruins, will be connected with limitless, awful bloodshed, and the Western countries, NATO member countries in particular, they are contributing, and in fact they are responsible, they are going to take responsibility for that bloodshed. One relevant piece of news in this regard. In Donetsk city criminal court, there have been started hearings on the criminal case of 3 foreign mercenaries. 2 of them, they are British subjects, though Prime Minister Johnson already told them that it is their business and their salvation should be arranged by the Kiev authorities, and 1 Moroccan subject. And I believe that it is just a first step. Relevant evidence, facts, videos, chemical analysis, DNC analysis in some cases are collected by the investigation committee of the Russian Federation and relevant agencies of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, so that all of those war criminals involved in mass murdering of people in Donbass and elsewhere would be brought to justice. And by the way, capital punishment is still available on the criminal codes of those 2 people's republics. In Russian, capital punishment is suspended, is frozen for some years after now already cancelled our joining of the Council of Europe and relevant arrangements under the auspices of this structure. So what are other aspects that should be mentioned in this regard? Unfortunately, and this was as well noted by our minister, unfortunately, Western governments are pushing Ukraine to dig deeper, or maybe even to sink in that sea of troubles of this military conflict, of these hostilities, in different ways. Just the day before yesterday, it was Mr. Biden, which muttered or mumbled, excuse me for my English, something like, it is for Ukraine to decide what is victory for Ukraine, what could be considered a victory for Ukraine, and what is a possible eventual acceptable compromise for Ukraine. But de facto, the voices of reasonably thinking politicians in the West, like, for example, Mr. Kissinger, Berlusconi, Erdogan, Zelensky and his entourage resolutely rejects the idea of resumption of negotiations and asking for more and more weapons. As for continuation of negotiations, I believe it is worth remembering the prelude of this story, which took place in the first weeks of military operation. There was a number of sessions of talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations, at first in Belarus and later in Istanbul, Turkish capital. In Istanbul, it was registered a unique courage, I don't know, bravery, unique behavior on behalf of Kyiv. For the first time, starting from those Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 in 2014, 2015, they presented more or less a reasonable document which could be considered as a starting point for negotiations. Russian side responded with its own draft, but overnight the central presidential administration in Kyiv disavowed the draft, and by now they are not speaking about it at all, as if it was not existent. In this regard, we shouldn't forget that Kyiv regimes, governments, one after another, under two presidents already, or three, 2.5 if you count Mr. Turchinov illegal acting president status in this count. All of them, they never, not a single time, have carried out any of their commitments given this way or that way in the contact group of Minsk negotiating process, or in the so-called Normandian format, where Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine had another platform to look for the way out of many deadlock situations in this regard. Never. So credibility of Ukrainian government, of the current Ukrainian government, as well as a negotiating partner, has been exhausted, and I would say has been destroyed by this government itself and its predecessors. So this is as well a factor that is not encouraging any efforts to resume political negotiations or process of political settlement of this situation in Ukraine. What could be added, which is, I believe, important to add and to finish up with this issue, this big set of issues, is we can't ignore the devastating effect of the Dr. Hebel's, Minister of Propaganda of Nazi Germany, if somebody doesn't remember. Dr. Hebel's style war propaganda campaign, based on the tropical storm of fakes produced by Kyiv and supported by Western, majorly British, according to the following the expression of President Putin, empire of lies, PR and propaganda industry. Exemplary illustration is the situation around recently fired sacked Commissioner for Human Rights of Ukraine, Lyudmila Denisova. She specialized on producing fantastic, phantasmagoric fakes about cases of rape, pedophilia, atrocities against the elderly, male and female, by Russian troops against Ukrainian population. I don't believe that you know what was the formal pretext for sending her away. It was dissatisfaction with the unsubstantiated, not substantiated by any facts, those stories. That means she was sacked for producing lies and slander. Somebody could say maybe it is just a piece of Kremlin propaganda. No. A day or a couple of days later, a representative, I don't know how official, but as far as I know, it is, this is the person working and having direct relation to General Prosecutor's Office in Ukraine, named Gerasimchuk, as well confirmed this claim. It denied existence of any facts or criminal cases on sexual violence allegedly by that recently ombudswoman Lyudmila Denisenko, Commissioner for Human Rights, Lyudmila Denisova, I'm sorry, allegedly committed by the Russian military. So Ukrainian law enforcement agency confirms that all the claims of Madame Denisova were lies, to put it mildly. Do you believe that European Union and many European countries leaders dropped mentioning them in their accusations against Russia? You can't imagine. They are repeating all those lies as if nothing has happened. So if I'm speaking about the factors hampering positive efforts to restart political process of negotiating peace in Ukraine, I don't believe that such atmosphere created intendedly, I believe, because those people on the top, I can't believe that they're badly informed. I believe that they are disinformed and they don't want to know the truth. And as a result, no, I would say, reliably effective negotiating process to go on like this. Well, let us stop here because it was just endless. Of course, we remember legendary saying of James Bond, never say never. We do not say that it is completely impossible. But we can't exclude this whole story from the wider context of international situation. And we can't forget, because amnesia, it is another big barrier in the way of political process to take place again, the hostilities, the continuation of hostilities in Ukraine. We know very well that back in December last year, Russian Federation presented to NATO and the United States of America draft treaties speaking on our legitimate, realistic concerns about threats to our national security, represented in expansion of NATO and some other arrangements during the recent couple of decades. Those arrangements breaching well-established norms of international law on our European continent and elsewhere. In particular, for example, the Istanbul Charter of European Security, which spoke eloquently and quite clearly on unacceptability, inadmissibility that any state or any group of states would improve, strengthen its own security at the expense, harming the security of other states. Now in the West, they prefer not to remember that. But we have good memory. And if somebody is going to or prefers to forget it, then in fact no serious, no sustainable negotiating process could go on. So we're ready for negotiations, and this was confirmed by Russian leaders more than once. We have traditionally in our history great love for peace. Russians are not warmongers in no way, but rephrasing certain words of our leaders, we know that the goals of the special military operation in Ukraine should be achieved finally, and there is no other option for us. We haven't touched upon denazification. If you are interested, we can. I can add a couple of details in this regard. But the most important, I believe, that a whole generation of young Ukrainians has been brought up in the atmosphere of hatred on the basis of hate language. I tried to explain it to Romanian public in the terms much better known to it, using this European and Western democratic slang language. Well, as a result, showing shocking samples of, you see, resemblance of the practices of ISIL in the Middle East, Islamic State. Children from the age of 3, 4, 5 years, they are taught the basic principles of hatred towards everything Russian, Russian culture, Russian language, Russian people, and so on and so forth. Recently, we have heard from the West, I believe after it has exhausted the arsenal of its slanderous arguments, that Russia is pursuing the course of elimination, discrimination, I don't know what, of Ukrainian culture. Oh God, ask Ukrainians who are living in Russia, millions of them. Ask Ukrainians living in Donbass. All of them, they are well, they are good Ukrainian speakers. Once upon a time, I have mentioned that my son-in-law is as well a Ukrainian speaker, and he is a Ukrainian ethnic, and so on and so forth. There are millions of such cases. Anybody who has the slightest connection or had the slightest chance to get acquainted with the Russian movies, Soviet movies, you'll find if in America, in Hollywood movies, they should be always good and bad policemen, preferably one of them African American, another one white American. In our movies, they were always a positive protagonist, speaking Ukrainian, being a Ukrainian ethnic group. And the number of such movies is endless, believe me. So nevertheless, in Ukraine, this is an urgent need to change very much in their school books and other materials, starting from kindergarten, because the whole population, whole generation has been brought up during the recent couple of decades in this mentality, in this pattern of vision of the world of extreme nationalism and particular hatred. It doesn't matter that Ukrainian president is an ethnic Jew, though he took his oath being sworn into the presidency, being inaugurated on the Christian Bible. It is not anti-Semitism, though if we just push away this amnesia temptation and remember that it was not only anti-Semitism, it was and a whole list of people who were considered by the Nazis as Untermensch, underhuman, subhuman, not meriting to live and doomed for extinction. This is mentality based on hatred and inhuman attitudes towards other nations and to human beings in general. So I'm just putting not a full stop, but some pause in between the previous presentation, coming back to some question of yours. There was an interesting question as well, having certain relation to the prospects of political settlement in Ukraine. In one episode, in one of his speeches, President Putin mentioned, speaking about, I would say, barbaric campaign in Ukraine of destroying everything, as they say, related to Communist past. Communist past, including Alexander Pushkin, American embassy in Moscow called him Ivan Sergeyevich Pushkin. I congratulate American embassy. Including statues of Soviet generals and marshals of Ukrainian ethnic origin who participated and played a pivotal role in liberation of Ukraine in the Second World War, and so on and so forth. And reacting to those barbaric practices, Putin said, you need decommunization. We can provide you, we can secure you a complete decommunization. And what does it mean? Of course, it was a figurative expression which showed, or if you like, mentioned the fact that in the Soviet Union, many borders between administrative units and between national, so-called national republics were rather artificial. They were drawn and delineated on the basis of some political, sometimes cultural, sometimes simply personal will of certain leader. Like, for example, we remember the role of Khrushchev in giving back Crimea to Ukraine within the Soviet Union. Though when the Soviet Union was created, this year will remember 100 years of creation of the Soviet Union in December. Crimean Republic was one of co-founders of the Soviet Union at the equal level, at the equal footing with Ukrainian Republic, with Ukraine. Later it became an autonomous republic within Ukraine by the decision or by the push from Mr. Khrushchev, leader of the Communist Party by that time. So there were many. But if you take a more generic view on that aspect of Soviet history, you'll find that some of the republics, and in particular Ukraine, was tailored and sewn according to the pattern of the Soviet Union itself. So if in the West it is now a trend to treat Soviet Union as an empire, then Ukraine was a mini empire. And it is including by now very heterogeneous ethnically, culturally, linguistically regions, from Transcarpathian, for example, Lviv or Volyn regions, to eastern and southern parts, even not remembering Crimea itself, yes. Russian and Jewish Odessa, with specific, very specific style of Odessa, if you like, dialect, way of pronunciation, sense of humor, and so on and so forth. Unique cultural, civilizational phenomenon, if you like. And of course, compared to Lviv, for example, inhabitants, so-called Zahidense, Westerners, being properly translated into English, Westerners, they were two big differences, and the number of minor ones, as well, an expression originating from Odessa, unique culture of pre-Maidan history of Ukraine. So if it was like that, a patched territory, which was kept all together by the force of Communist Party at the so-called pan-union or federal level, it was all the same in Ukraine. Why should we treat it as something eternally unchangeable, untouchable? Look at Yugoslavia, look at some other examples. For example, I can say that Libya, when I was posted there as a young attaché, was a big integral country. Now, in fact, it is at least 2 states existing there. What is the perspective? God knows. In fact, in practice, their number is larger. It is not 2. It is more than 2. I'm not going to elaborate on it. It is not my direct sphere of competence by now, where I've spent about 30 years in the Middle East. So this is the explanation. It is not the answer, of course. So if Ukrainians, I mean the leaders of the country, the bonzes of this regime, from time to time relying upon true criminals released from prisons, like it was recently in Kharkov, when murderers, gangsters, mobsters were let free, armed, and of course they made atmosphere in the city much more civilized, peaceful, and progress promoting in general. Well, if those people, they are going to pursue this line, all those regions, they will have their say. Like we see now, for example, in Kherson region, Kherson Oblast, which is located to the north of Crimea and to the south west from Donetsk, Donetsk Republic. So our stand on this, in this regard, Russian stand, you remember that from the beginning, President Putin declared that we are not aiming, we have no desire to occupy Ukraine or any part of Ukraine. But of course, future fate, future statehood, if you like, of Ukraine should be defined by the Ukrainians themselves, by Ukrainian people. This is our stand in this regard. What else could we speak about? As well, interesting geopolitical, though we have already entered the area of speculation, if you like. Yes. I once more appeal to you not to take my words as a final political stand of the Russian Federation, but some ideas that are based on our political position and could be applicable to such topics. For example, you have noticed, evidently, the rapprochement, big rapprochement between Warsaw and modern Kiev. When President Duda embraced President Zelensky so warmly, as if they were brothers by blood. And a number of declarations coming from Warsaw that there will be no borders between Poland and Ukraine, or some kind of entity, unitary entity, God knows what, could be established and so on. I don't know what are the plans, geopolitical plans of Warsaw in detail, of course. But we see that Ukrainian conflict, it has objectively gave ground for all kind of geopolitical adventurists to play their game. For example, now, yesterday, successfully surviving the votes in its Conservative Party, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has declared that he is looking for another alliance to be created in Europe. It will encompass the Baltic states, Poland, Ukraine, and British, the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Evidently at the head. And what about NATO? What about European Union? Because good half of the members of that eventual future alliance are members of the European Union. What kind of alliance it would be? Military political, then what about NATO? Economic, and what about European Union? The difference between NATO and Union and the European Union gradually is evaporating. It is evidently an observation that nobody can deny. This is my vision. These are my ideas that would be applied to look for an answer to such a question. Though, of course, it is very difficult, and maybe it is not very plausible to try to precede the real developments and the real changes on the map, just under the title of you see, pragmatically scrutinizing such ideas. And they are circulating in geopolitical environment of Europe and North Atlantic area. Though now North Atlantic very soon will be treated as the center of the universe, including Indian Pacific. I don't know what else. What else remains? Only Arctic. I believe they will find a way to stick Arctic as well to that wider definition of Euro-Atlantic space and sphere of responsibility of the NATO alliance. Okay, I believe that we have some time for questions. Otherwise, I thank you for your patience to listen to this long review of the current situation. Please, if there are any questions, I am ready to answer. Of course, within the limits of my knowledge and understanding of the situation. Please.
Добрый день.
Добрый.
Можно вопрос? Я хотел бы все-таки, Валерий Иванович, чтобы вы вернулись к вопросу о декоммунизации. Вот мы говорим, основные цели, значит, это защита Донбасса, демилитаризация, денацификация. А можно ли говорить еще и о декоммунизации в смысле территориальном? В том смысле, что речь может идти об обнулировании, об отмене незаконных решений коммунистического режима о включении исторических русских территорий в состав Украины. Не только Крым, но и речь идет о Донбассе, речь идет о Новороссии, включая Одессу. Вот такой у меня вопрос. Спасибо.
Будешь переводить по-английски? Ну ладно, я попробую по-английски, если... Я попробую по-английски ничего, если отвечу, или по-русски отвечу?
По-английски вы говорили, я бы хотел по-русски, если можно.
Ну хорошо, по-русски. Значит, что я вам хочу сказать? Значит, это вопрос сейчас, на данный момент, вопрос, который может, на мой взгляд, серьезно рассматриваться в ходе научных дискуссий. Сама постановка вопроса в разрезе того, чтобы сейчас каким-то образом отменить иногда преступные, иногда нелогичные, иногда противоречащие международному праву решения каких-то прежних режимов, ну, в морально-этическом плане можно говорить о том, что, так сказать, как бы было хорошо, или неплохо было бы учесть. Вот. Но есть масса других в этом плане, так сказать, примеров, как раз дающих повод сторониться подобного рода подхода, потому что, вот, к примеру, мы знаем, что на последнем этапе существования СССР был принят закон о том, что автономные республики в составе союзных республик, например, Приднестровская Молдавская республика в составе Молдавии, вот та же Республика Крым в составе Украины, по логике, да? Абхазия в составе Грузии, ну и ряд других был, так? Не будем сейчас углубляться в детали. Они в случае, если союзная республика, скажем, Молдавия, Украина, там, Грузия, остальные, захочет реализовать свое право на самоопределение и выйти из состава Союза Советских Социалистических Республик, то автономии имели право провести референдум и самоопределиться. Кто помнит об этом законе сейчас? Вот мы говорили о Стамбульской хартии 1999 года, не такой, ну, правда, в прошлом тысячелетии, 23 года от нее прошло. Все, нам не интересно. Мы намного лучше, я пытаюсь имитировать позицию Запада, мы намного лучше помним Парижскую хартию, которая была 10 годами раньше, когда еще существовал Варшавский договор и так далее. Она нам больше нравится. Вот, поэтому мы последующие документы, которые, кстати, не в единственном числе были приняты по поводу неделимости безопасности в Европе, да, нам не интересно. Поэтому, понимаете, это немножко умозрительно вот, углубляться в эту тему, на мой взгляд. Вот. Хотя, конечно, в идеале, наверное, что-то такое можно было. Для этого нужна прежде всего взаимная политическая воля. Если бы мы видели, что политические элиты во многих местах, не только на постсоветском пространстве, стремились исключительно к достижению блага и, значит, обеспечению подлинных национальных интересов своих государств, своих народов, то множество проблем могло бы быть решено. Множество проблем. Вот сейчас, например, мы видим парадоксальную вещь. Вот Россия, испытывая прямую угрозу со стороны Украины, кстати, к теме демилитаризации Украины, которая идет вторым номером после обеспечения безопасности Донбасса, сейчас, как вы знаете, добавилась не отрицающая этого тезиса, но расширяющая это понятие тема о нейтральном внеблоковом статусе Украины. Это как раз связано вот с той линией, о которой я говорил, когда еще в декабре мы уже оказались в значительной степени в тупике, и как выход из этого тупика Россия предложила политическое решение заключить соответствующее соглашение с США и НАТО о том, чтобы инфраструктура, военная инфраструктура НАТО отправилась назад к уровню или к границам 1997 года, когда была подписана такая достаточно мощная декларативная бумага, фундаментальный акт об отношениях России с НАТО. Вот. Казалось бы, все очень логично. А нам рассказывают, нет, у нас, понимаете, вот в уставе НАТО написано, что любой может войти туда, и все, мы больше ничего не хотим. Да, понимаете, все остальное при таких подходах становится благими пожеланиями. Поэтому я не думаю, что нам нужно сильно углубляться в эту тему. Хотя напоминать западным политическим элитам, тяжело пораженным амнезией, выборочной такой амнезией, там, где хочу, помню, где не хочу, не помню. Вот это, наверное, нужно, несомненно. Вот, никто этого не отрицает. Вот, ну, примерно так. Пожалуйста, еще вопросы есть? Давай. Что это? Ну, давай. Да, переводи. Кто вопросы готовит, пожалуйста, сейчас мы перевод даем. Давай. Коротенько.
Deci, acest întrebări, dacă se poate în include și decomunizarea teritorială în cadrul operațiunii militare speciale în Ucraina, aceste întrebări ar trebui să fie discutate în cadrul unor discuțiilor științifice. Pentru că au existat multe diferite acte, diferite decizii. Se poate vorbi despre aceste decizii că erau ilogice sau nu erau drepte. Dar, de exemplu, exista și o lege la etapa finală a existenței RSS, conform căreia Republicii Sovietice Socialiste Autonome, care erau în cadrul Republicilor Sovietice Socialiste, puteau să-și decide soartă în cazul în care Republica Sovietică Socialistă își decide soartă, de exemplu, Abhazia în cadrul Georgiei sau Crimea în cadrul Ucrainei. Și avem multe alte exemple de decizii, de acte despre care nu se ține minte. De exemplu, Carta de la Istanbul, Occident nu se ține minte, dar se ține minte de Carta de la Paris, care fusese adoptată cu 10 ani în urmă. Și putem să spunem că acum, la obiectivele operațiunii militare speciale, s-a adăugat o altă teză privind statutul neutral și în afara blocurilor militare al Ucrainei. Și ținem minte că în decembrie s-a discutat cererea Rusiei de a reveni la situația din anul 1997, adică la situația dinainte de adoptarea actului fundamental Rusia-НАТО.
Ну вот, пожалуйста, если есть еще вопросы, давайте. Если нет, я готов.
Слышно меня, да?
Да, пожалуйста.
Здравствуйте, Валерий Иванович, с наступающим вас праздником. телеграм-канале посольства была размещена просьба к находящимся в Румынии гражданам России, соотечественникам, обращаться за поддержкой в случае угроз или дискриминации. Хотя вы уже отчасти коснулись этой темы, хочу все же спросить, были ли такие обращения и изменилось ли в целом, по вашим впечатлениям, отношение к россиянам в Румынии? Может быть, сравнительно с другими странами? Спасибо.
Спасибо. Значит, да, совершенно верно. У нас открыта такая возможность обращения в посольство с сообщениями о нарушениях прав российских граждан. Такие обращения в наше посольство, конкретно в консульский отдел, были. И, к сожалению, я бы сказал, что они, наверное, еще и будут. Главным образом, я уже упомянул, о чем шла речь. Это главным образом это отказ в нормальном банковском обслуживании, блокирование счетов, отказ в выпуске банковских карт и финансирование бизнеса. До настоящего времени это не коснулось нефтегазового бизнеса, поскольку это, видимо, в понимании здешних банкиров и властей в целом вышло бы за рамки уже принятых санкционных решений антироссийских на уровне Евросоюза. Хотя надо сказать, что наша активная, так сказать, позиция, наши протесты вот в некоторых случаях имели и приводили к некоторым сдвигам, но чисто частно. Вот, например, мне объясняют, я сам, конечно, этим не занимаюсь, мне объясняют, что вот в банке, если сотрудник посольства придет и на румынском языке объяснит, зачем ему там нужна карточка, мы ее сделаем. Вот. Особенно если это карточка в леях, вот, не предполагает переводов куда-то за границу и так далее. Вот. Если же придет человек без румынского языка и с готовностью подписать любой договор, который ему предложит банк, ему счет не откроют и карточку не дадут. Вот такая интересная практика. Чем это? Есть пара банков, я не хочу делать им в данном случае дополнительную рекламу, негативную рекламу, потому что наши соотечественники о них знают, такая информация распространяется быстро. А вот негативная реклама, которая послужит поводом для наезда на эти банки, я не хочу поэтому называть их, они как бы ведут несколько более, по секрету скажу так, что иностранные банки. Тут таких много, поэтому я их не засвечу. Вот. Ну вот, они, значит, более лояльно относятся к российским гражданам. Я говорю про студентов, пока у нас вроде, не сглазить, не было тревожных сигналов. Нет откровенной пока, по крайней мере, дискриминации проявления российской культуры, как в некоторых западных странах, где уже запрещают Чайковского. И, как я вам уже сказал, Пушкина перекрестили в Ивана Сергеевича, даже в посольстве в Москве. Это, говорит, был известный же русский поэт Иван Сергеевич Пушкин. Вот. Так что в этом смысле какие-то нюансы есть. Но с другой стороны, что, в общем-то, не вызывает никакого оптимизма, заключается в том, что румынские власти, а мы в основном, как это положено в соответствии с международными договорами, действуем через Министерство иностранных дел, они не проявляют стремления к устранению тех вот фактов дискриминации, например, в банковской сфере. Это не наше дело. Вот такая примерно позиция румынских властей. Это не наше дело, мы ничего не ждем. Вот дикий коллаж какого-то прибалтийского псевдо-творца установили на углу нашего здания напротив бюста короля Михаила I, бывшего короля. Вот. Меня, например, несколько раз вызывали в МИД за то, что где-то, как мы, как правило, умели доказать на основании неполной или избирательной информации, Министерство иностранных дел Румынии чувствовало подозрение, что каким-то образом затронуто достоинство главы румынского государства. Ну, объясняли на словах, вот и на фактах, что здесь ничего такого нет, здесь все по логике. Вот. А это что? Это разве не оскорбление достоинства государства, с которым у вас есть дипломатические отношения? Какой ответ? Это решение примарии Бухареста. Мы вашу ноту им переслали. Я говорю, друзья мои, у вас разве не унитарное государство? Они, какое? Я говорю, ну как, централизованное, унитарное. Вот у нас федерация, у вас унитарное государство. У нас есть в Конституции некоторые полномочия, которые делятся регионами с центром федеральным. Но внешняя политика тоже основная определяется федеральным правительством. У вас, вы что, хотите мне сказать, что внешняя политика Румынии определяется на муниципальном уровне? Этот вопрос, скажем так, ну не хочу сильных выражений, воспринимается как-то своеобразно. И ответа на него ждать не приходится. Понимаете? Вот. Поэтому, несомненно, мы ценим, что румынские правоохранительные органы в целом проводят эффективную работу по обеспечению охраны нашего посольства. Это выгодно отличает нас, Румынию, от ряда других столиц Европы, хотя наши ворота, как вы знаете, тоже пытались протаранить 6 апреля рано утром. Вот. Поэтому в динамике можно сказать, что позиция Бухареста официально дрейфует вместе с позицией Брюсселя. Вот. И, так сказать, проявление... Сейчас вот прислали, не буду вдаваться в подробности, ноту о новом порядке аккредитации сотрудников российских загранучреждений. Ну, это просто, как говорится, ну, на уровне хорошего такого королевского двора, церемония, протокол, процедура. На этом поставлю многоточие. Но этот новый порядок не добавит ничего, чтобы создать благоприятные условия для деятельности дипломатической миссии, как это предусмотрено в Венской конвенции о дипломатических сношениях 1961 года. А там написано, что принимающее государство должно создать максимально возможные, конечно, не какие-то привилегированные, но максимально возможные благоприятные условия для деятельности дипломатических миссий. Вот такой вот ответ. И он тоже с открытым концом. События будут развиваться, и тогда можно будет что-то добавить.
Спасибо.
Deci, întrebarea era legată de existența faptului în care cetățenii ruși sau compatrioți s-au adresat la ambasadă cu privire la amenințări și discriminare. Și răspunsul a fost, da, au fost fapte când cetățenii ruși s-au adresat și probabil vor avea loc aceste fapte. În ceea ce privește cazurile de discriminare, în primul rând putem să dăm un exemplu care este legat de bănci, adică refuzul de a deservi în bănci. Din cât știe domnul ambasador, dacă un angajat al ambasadei ruse vine la bancă și vorbește română, primește deservirea și contul poate fi deschis. Dar dacă un angajat care nu vorbește română vine la bancă, nu poate deschide niciun cont. În ceea ce privește discriminarea culturii ruse, situația nu este atât de teribilă cât în alte țări. În România nu sunt interzise Tchaikovsky sau Pușkin și Pușkin nu este redenumit în Ivan Sergeevici, așa cum a făcut ambasada SUA la Moscova. Dar există faptele care nu provoacă optimism. pentru că autoritățile române nu demonstrează aspirația de a înlătura faptele de amenințări și discriminare sau de jignire. De exemplu, în ceea ce privește băncile, partea română spune că aceasta este decizie băncilor, decizie personală a băncilor respective. Și vis un alt exemplu, o expoziție de pe piațeta Regele Mihai I, adică intersecția șoseaua Kiselev și strada Ion Mincu, a fost instalată o expoziție și nu au fost întreprins niciun pas de a rezolva cumva această situație. Domnul ambasador ține minte că a fost convocat la Maia când se crea impresia că probabil demnitatea șefului de stat român era cumva afectată. Acum, dacă vorbim despre expoziția de pe piațeta Regele Mihai, această expoziție, da, este o insultă la adresa șefului de stat rus. Dar nu se face nimic, pentru că, conform părții române, decizia de a instala această expoziție a fost a primăriei sectorului 1. Și, în acest sens, ambasadorul întreba la Maia României de ce se face așa, oare România nu este un stat unitar? Se înțelege corect că deciziile de politică externă se iau la nivelul autorităților municipale. Răspunsul nu a existat în acest sens. Dar în ceea ce privește poziția Bucureștiului, în general, se schimbă acum, așa cum se schimbă poziția Bruxellesului. Recent am primit o nouă notă verbală privind o nouă procedură de acreditare. Ambasadorul nu dorea să intre în detalii, dar a spus că totul seamănă cu o ceremonie la o curte regală. De fapt, aceste demersuri nu contribuie la îmbunătățirea relațiilor între cele două state și nu corespund cu Convenția de la Viena din 1961, conform căreia statul trebuie să creeze condiții favorabile pentru misiuni diplomatice, astfel încât acestea să-și îndeplinească sarcinile.
Any more questions? No more questions. Okay, so I take responsibility to bring our press conference, press briefing to the final stage, and would like to mention a couple of points that as well are relevant to some questions that we have received before about and mostly focused on the special military operation of Russia in Ukraine and conflict that is now burning in Ukraine. Of course, it has civil dimension as well, internal civil dimension in Ukraine. I would like to remind that from the start, Russian Federation declared through its head of state, through President Vladimir Putin, that among the major aims of Russian special operation is minimization of human loss and destruction of civilian infrastructure in this country. And in the hostilities themselves, we pursue most possibly legal, conforming to the international conventions, relevant international conventions, way of waging those hostilities, including in particular due care for the prisoners of war, provision of due food, medical assistance to those POWs who need them. And these, I would say, humane, other adjectives were rejected by Romanian diplomatic colleagues, of course, already, so I'm not going to use them. These humane attitudes is not very well understood to the West, at least to the political elite in the West, because it has got accustomed to the brutal, barbaric ways of waging wars and interventions. I am going even to avoid the name of the leaders of those interventions. I would name only the countries they took place. In the very last year of previous century in Yugoslavia, then in Iraq, then in Libya, now elsewhere in the world, not to forget about Somalia, which started so long ago that nobody remembers when. Nevertheless, we are going to follow this line, this strategy, because we are not fighting neither Ukraine, neither Ukrainians as a nation. We are fighting for securing our legitimate national security interests, as it was presented in the numerous documents circulated last December and later. And on the other hand, American draft law of providing modern arms to Ukraine was launched in Congress well before 24th of February, in late January. So such minor details reveal the genuine, true intentions of the sides involved. Russia has been always looking for reliable guarantees of security and peace in the atmosphere of limitation and possibly maybe return to resumption, to reduction of strategic weapons. Why not? But it needs certain atmosphere, certain arrangements. Unfortunately, our Western counterparts in this regard, up to now, have lost all their credibility. They are cheating, they are lying, they are relying on slander, arrogant slander. It resembles me, the expression used, a phrase written by long ago famous American satirist Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain. He said that there is a lie, a big lie, and statistics. In this regard, all of them in the usage of the Western political elite resemble big lie. And sometimes, from time to time, we're running out of time. What is it? Look, 52 seconds. I believe we'll have enough time to finish up. From time to time, sometimes not only the Pope, not only the Pope. I was already strictly reprimanded for quoting the Pope's quotations about his perception of the roots and reasons of this Ukrainian crisis. But some other figures, they speak really frankly and touch upon the truth or some aspects of the truth. And to finish up our dialogue, our press conference, I would like to quote one of them. It is as well a religious figure, though it is said that he was twice excommunicated by the Catholic Church, but nevertheless he was received warmly, as far as I can judge. In Warsaw, participated in sermons, joint sermons with the Polish priests, and he made such a statement: among the heads of state, there is only one who faces the forces of evil. Don't rely on Boris Johnson in England. Don't rely on Macron in France. Don't rely on Draghi in Italy. Vladimir Putin, who may be not an angel or a saint, is nevertheless a man of great intelligence and courage. And at the head of Russia, he has the means to confront the one world government, said Williamson. Then he elaborated about his conversations with some group of Catholic Polish ladies who all understood that Vladimir Putin is right. I was very surprised. I know that there have been wars between Poland and Russia, and maybe one will come again, he said. The Russians are fighting in Ukraine, but not in such a way as to crush Ukraine. Vladimir Putin said the goal was to denazify or Nazify and demilitarize Ukraine. But reckless Europe is following the United States to try to crush Russia. The war is likely to worsen. We have to do what we can to prepare ourselves. It is rather somber prophecy. I hope that with the goodwill on both sides, we would manage to overcome this really complicated, critical situation, which from time to time and more often brings us to think that following this current way of escalation, which is followed faithfully by the Western countries, pumping more and more arms into Ukraine, we're really moving towards more dangerous perspectives. I'm not going to elaborate on this subject. I believe that you are quite aware of it. And let us make a pause, a stopover here, with the appeal to all the reasonable, sober-minded people all over the world. And we know that in 130 states or countries, they have taken upper hand up to now, will exert effort that is possible, available for them, so that to avoid that perilous, really disastrous perspective of endless escalation of this war. I liked in that regard quotations from Indian and Pakistani, and almost in unison, Indian and Pakistani foreign ministers, they spoke responding to Western insistent demands to join anti-Russian sanctions. They said, why do you believe that Ukraine, it is our problem? You behave yourself as if a problem in Europe is universal, global problem. And our problems means, in the meaning of Indian problem, or I don't know, African problem, it is our problem. You should drop it. I believe it is quite good advice. And I wish and hope for brighter perspectives of peace and reasonable pragmatic cooperation among all the nations. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.